Welcome to this introduction to the European Parliament. The European Parliament is one of the original institutions of the European coal and steel community. Yet, it has evolved and increased its powers tremendously in the course of time. Today, the European Parliament is one of the core and EU institutions in many of the policy-making processes and EU politics. The ordinary legislative procedure, which is the most commonly used procedure to make EU laws, it is co-legislator together with the Council of Ministers. Its role is probably less pronounced and formalized in areas such as foreign and security policy. In this brief introduction, I will first take you through the European Parliament's historical evolution, then distinguish three roles, namely the European Parliament's legislative, budgetary, and supervisory roles. And then I will turn to the broad strokes of its internal organization. In the institutional design of the European coal and steel community, the European Parliament was actually called Assembly. Its members had a dual mandate, which means that there were members of national parliaments who were delegated to the Assembly of the European Coal and Steel Community. The Assembly had no legislative powers at all. With the Treaty of Rome of '58, the name was changed into European Parliamentary Assembly, and it received limited budgetary powers. This power to influence budgetary decisions, which has increased in the course of time, has been an important tool for the European Parliament. It used it as a leverage to demand concessions in other policy areas from the European Commission and the Council of Ministers. In 1962, the European Parliamentary Assembly decided for itself to adopt the name European Parliament. This was a symbolic move to demonstrate that the institution strove to play a similar role to national parliaments, which it obviously didn't do at the time. In 1979, the European Parliament took a step closer to becoming a parliament directly representing European peoples. The first European Parliament election through direct universal suffrage was held in 1970. Before that, its members were nominated by national parliaments. The Rome Treaty establishing the European Economic Community, which was signed in '57, included the provision that the Assembly shall introduce proposals for direct universal suffrage, which it did as early as 1960. But the Council of Ministers only adopted its decision pertaining to the issue 10 years later, in 1970, leading to the first European elections in 1979. Since then, the European Parliament has been newly elected every 5 years. Yet, there is no uniform EU-wide electoral system. While most EU member states have only one single constituency, countries such as Germany have 16 constituencies, which are its different regions, the Bundesländer. Also, Belgium is another example of a number of constituencies. Also, the threshold for parties to be able to enter the European Parliament differ according to EU member state. If you are an EU citizen, have a look at your country's rules for the European elections. If you are not from the EU, choose one country. We will compare the results in class. With the entry into force of the Single European Act in 1987, the European Parliament started becoming involved in lawmaking processes as well. Initially, through the cooperation procedure, which did not yet give it equal rights to the Council of Ministers, but it marked a first step towards becoming a full-fledged co-legislator. From then on, with every revision of the EU treaties, the European Parliament received more powers and increased its legislative role and influence. In 1993, when the Maastricht Treaty entered into force, the cooperation procedure was extended and a new procedure was introduced, the so-called co-decision procedure. This procedure resembles strongly the ordinary legislative procedure that we have today. Initially, it was a bit more cumbersome and did not include the possibility to reach agreement after the first reading. Nonetheless, it was a tremendous success for the European Parliament, making it a co-legislator together with the Council of Ministers. However, initially only for a very limited number of policy areas. When the Amsterdam Treaty entered into force in 1999, it extended the scope of application of the co-decision procedure and simplified the procedure, basically to what we know today. The Lisbon Treaty entered into force in 2009 and renamed the co-decision procedure into ordinary legislative procedure. It also, yet again, expanded the scope of application so that, like its name suggests, it has become the ordinary or the standard procedure used for making EU laws. In the course of EU history, the European Parliament has thus gradually gained more powers and evolved into one of the core institutions and co-legislator with the Council of Ministers in many policy areas. The European Parliament has thus a legislative role in the EU institutional architecture, but it also has a budgetary and a supervisory role. The European Parliament plays its legislative role by participating in the different policy-making procedures, which are the ordinary legislative procedure, in which the Parliament and the Council of Ministers are co-legislators, the consultation procedure, which postulates the obligation to consult the European Parliament before adopting a law, but does not oblige the Council of Ministers to actually take the European Parliament's opinion into account. And we have the consent procedure, in which the European Parliament cannot amend the text, but it must give its consent to the final version of the text. This is, for example, used for international trade agreements. The European Parliament can also adopt own initiative reports and ask the European Commission, which generally has the prerogative to propose laws, to submit legislative proposals. Such a request needs to be adopted by a majority of the Parliament's component members. The European Parliament also plays a role in the adoption of the EU budget. It must give its consent to the so-called multi-annual financial framework, which is negotiated every 7 years. The European Parliament is also co-decision maker together with the Council of Ministers for the EU's annual budget. A third important role of the European Parliament lies in its supervision of the executive. This takes many forms and occurs at various occasions. For example, the European Parliament plays a role in scrutinizing the appointment of the President of the European Commission and of the Commissioners. The candidate for the President of the Commission is proposed by the European Council and then elected by the European Parliament by a majority of its component members. All commissioners are approved by the European Parliament by a simple majority, but only after having been scrutinized in sometimes very tough hearings. Have a look at the recordings of some of the hearings. For example, Miguel Cañete or Günther Oettinger might be very interesting and entertaining cases. You can find them on the internet. The European Parliament can also dismiss the College of Commissioners, thus the entire group of commissioners rather than individuals, by a 2/3 majority representing the majority of the EU's component members. The European Parliament also scrutinizes the Commission's accounts on the implementation of the budget, monitors EU policy implementation, and a number of other activities. It can establish temporary committees of inquiry for cases such as the BSE crisis, the mad cow disease, which happened in 1996. The European Parliament's internal organization resembles that of national parliaments, with political groups and committees. The European Parliament is composed of 750 members plus one president. Germany, for example, elects 96 members of European Parliament, so-called MEPs, and is the country with the largest number of MEPs. Estonia, Cyprus, Luxembourg and Malta, which are the smallest countries, have the smallest number of MEPs, with each sending 6 elected representatives. If you are an EU national, have a look at how many of your compatriots are represented by one single MEP. If you come from a non-EU country, choose an EU member state and do the same. We will compare the results in class. Most MEPs are members of political groups. Already in the very first meeting of the Common Assembly in 1952, did the delegates sit in political group formations rather than according to their nationality. This has remained the custom ever since. The number, names and members of the political groups change sometimes. But for example, the European People's Party, the Socialists and Democrats, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, or the Greens have existed for a long time. To form a political group, one needs at least 25 MEPs from at least 1/4 of the EU member states. Members from only very few member states can thus not form a political group. Have a look at the current number of political groups and their shares of seats in the European Parliament. How does this compare to your home country's parliament? A few MEPs are not attached to political groups, which is a disadvantage for them, since a number of rights and procedures, such as allocating speaking time in plenary, the chairpersonship of committees, or financial support, are partially distributed to political groups or on the basis of their membership. Around 20 parliamentary committees specialize in different policy areas, such as the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs, the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Committee on Fisheries. In these committees, the different legislative proposals and other initiatives are discussed before they are moved to the plenary. The committees vary in size between about 25 and 75 MEPs. Each committee has a chair, 4 vice chairs, a bureau, and a secretary. Their composition in terms of political groups reflects the general composition of the European Parliament. Their main task is drafting reports on legislative proposals and other initiatives and present them to plenary. So-called rapporteurs, who are individual MEPs, are assigned the responsibility to shepherd a legislative proposal through the negotiations within the committee. The European Parliament is based in 3 cities. MEPs spend most of their time in Brussels, where the committee and the political group meetings and a few so-called mini plenary sessions take place. The regular plenary sessions are held in Strasbourg in France, and parts of the European Parliament administration is based in Luxembourg. Roughly once a month, a massive traveling circus takes place, with all MEPs, their assistants, and European parliamentary staff packing their documents in Brussels and migrating to Strasbourg for about 3.5 days of plenary and other discussions. The European Parliament has thus gone through a tremendous transformation in the course of its history, from an assembly of delegates from national parliaments to influential co-legislator in many EU policy areas. I hope this introduction sparked your interest to find out more about this fascinating institution.